The early days of Russia's invasion of Ukraine haven't gone as planned, and the war so far isn't going well for Russia. Here's why it hasn't. Theoretically, a war between Russia and Ukraine is not a fair fight. Ukraine's military is dwarfed by Russia's military in many ways. They have more advanced weapons, superior capabilities in cyberspace, and a recent history of sophisticated deployments of military force. Yet, so far at least, the war has not gone Russia's way. Like Crimea, the Kremlin envisaged an overawed, divided Ukrainian society, and had anticipated marching through Ukraine and taking Kyiv quickly, ending the conflict before it really got underway. That didn't work out. Instead, the strategy has stretched supply lines and morale to a breaking point. While Russian tanks and military equipment have, at times, gotten stuck in mud, or ran out of gas. And then there is the argument that the invasion plan heavily employed conscripted soldiers, mostly tasked with providing logistics, and appear to be doing so very poorly, which some scholars believe can be blamed for some of the basic failures like fuel and food shortages. But why conscripts? One would assume that after days of joint military drills with Belarus during the build-up to this invasion, that Russia would deploy these troops in Ukraine. But there's the belief that Russia expects a NATO intervention at some point, and that those military drills were actually to prepare its troops for such an event. True or not, this makes sense when you take into consideration the kind of artillery seen during the drills, against what's displayed in Ukraine. The Ukrainians have managed to keep the Russian troops outside of Kyiv, which is the focal point of their initial advance. The Russians have failed to win control over any other major Ukrainian city, and are yet to achieve air supremacy, with several reports of some of its aircraft being shot down. According to the US intelligence assessments, Ukrainian soldiers have killed more than 3,000 Russian troops, shot down military transport planes carrying Russian paratroopers, downed helicopters and blown holes in Russia's convoys using American anti-tank missiles and armed drones supplied by Turkey. Ukrainian armed forces say more than 12,000 Russian troops have been killed. The Russia's defense ministry reports that 498 Russian soldiers have been killed, and nearly 1,600 wounded. Whichever figures you choose to believe, these are striking figures for just 2 weeks into the conflict. Pre-war research conducted by Russia's FSB intelligence agency suggested that Ukrainians were generally unhappy with their leadership, and pessimistic about their country's direction. It appears that the Russian invasion plan may have banked on this assessment, presuming that Ukrainian resistance would be light, and a rapid march on the capital would be feasible. This further explains why the Russian military decided not to deploy some of its more devastating weapons and tactics in the early days of the conflict, thus strengthening President Putin's narrative of this being a special military operation and not a war. Militaries typically adapt during conflicts, and Russia has the ability to adopt a more tailored strategy to the fierce Ukrainian resistance. There are already signs that Russia is changing to some of the most brutal tactics at its disposal, including large-scale bombings of Ukrainian cities. Still, some analysts argue that Russia has yet to commit its most effective forces, and Russian air power and artillery have sparingly been used. The Russian military has some very capable equipment, and they have some recent experience using them effectively. They are failing to properly employ those equipment, which in my opinion is more of a leadership issue. It's 2 weeks into the invasion and too early to see how the Russian campaign will end. So far, Russia is losing both on the battlefield and in the media. But the consensus among many military experts is that Russia has enough capacity to brute force the invasion. They are still favored to win the war, as it is simply too large and well equipped. If you enjoyed this video, then hit the thumbs up button below. And please subscribe to the channel to enable us create more amazing contents.